thank you everyone for joining this conversation today, and thanks to Sam and to the Citizen Evidence Lab of Amnesty International for co-hosting this webinar with us. Sam is one of First Draft's founding partners and co-wrote our 2017 guide on journalism and vicarious trauma. He also participated in a webinar around mental wellness and vicarious trauma we did for journalists covering coronavirus in April, in the middle of the first lockdown measures. What he did share with my colleagues Victoria and Lydia at that time was about how vicarious trauma, especially linked to the pandemic and to the lockdown situations, could have a huge but sometimes unconscious impact on people doing online investigations. We talked about how to recognize the signs of vicarious trauma and tips to fight it, but also about what newsrooms and managers in general could do to tackle the issue of vicarious trauma within their teams. I don't know about you, but for me, April already seems like a century ago. Yet the pandemic is still here, and we are still trying to cope on the long run with this very, very strange situation. Adding to this are several other tensions around the world, which can trigger vicarious trauma for journalists, fact checkers, and all people doing online investigations, really, especially with when their own identity, their gender, their ethnicity, their beliefs are targeted in the topics they are covering. I am thinking about the Black Lives Matter movement and the protests in the US, but also the extreme sexist and racist violence which can be found online. What makes today's conversation special is the focus on the specific matter, on this specific matter when it comes to vicarious trauma linked to online information disorder. What if you just can't switch off after what you have seen? Because the violence you have seen online is actually linked to your own identity. How to cope with this? We would like to make a first short poll just to start this conversation. That's very close in terms of replies. Do you have any comment about that, Sam?
I think what it shows is that I think vicarious trauma remains a big problem, and especially looking at who's attending this session, we see a lot of journalists from different newsrooms, but especially Western newsrooms. And certainly for myself, I'm not somebody as a 40-year-old white man, British man. I'm not somebody who's faced with the abuse that one receives online. I'm very privileged in the fact that I'm able to somewhat circumvent or travel through the online space and do the work I need to do as an investigator, and not get targeted. Even though I put out controversial information, or as Amnesty we're putting out controversial information all the time. But I know that a lot of my colleagues are. I know that a lot of my colleagues who are working in our regional offices, in the Middle East, who women get targeted a lot. I know that my colleagues who are working in the 3 regional offices we have in Sub-Saharan Africa are targeted a lot. So it's something that I think we have to be aware of as newsrooms or other forms of research as investigators today. And I think it's really what I think is great is that we have people in this session who have not been, and I'm really kind of feel really great that people want to learn about this and want to be aware of it and want to kind of bring it into their work and think about it as much for their colleagues and partners and people they work with as much as anything else. So.
Thank you. That's already very interesting.
I mean, I think we talked about it originally in the session in April, how the proximity of everything suddenly became a lot closer, and certainly for me that's been a massive kind of issue around the traumatization of this content. And I'm looking forward to hear from Pearlé a bit later about why that kind of thing, this kind of phenomenon was a driver to launch Rated R.
Definitely. So I just want to walk you through some further introductions for now. A very short introduction about who we are at First Draft, and then I'll pass on the floor to Sam to give you a quick introduction on the Citizen Evidence Lab, because maybe not everybody here is familiar either with First Draft or with the Citizen Evidence Lab. So at First Draft, very quickly, we work to empower people with knowledge and tools to build resilience against harmful, false, and misleading information. That's really the heart of our work. We do that by providing training for newsrooms and other organizations, but also by doing research and initiating and supporting collaborative information networks and projects. Sam, if you want to comment on the Citizen Evidence Lab.
Sure. So yeah, my name's Sam Dubberley. Hi everyone. I'm the head of the Evidence Lab at Amnesty International, and the Citizen Evidence Lab is kind of one part of the work that the Evidence Lab does. So Citizen Evidence Lab is an online resource that we share with the broader community, where we put a lot of experiences from Amnesty's work. So a little bit like First Draft, you know, case studies on how we do our work, but also kind of other areas of challenges for people doing these days, kind of open source research, open source investigations, or research at distance. So we share a lot in there also about vicarious traumatization, how we deal with that, or other challenges around that. The Evidence Lab in general is a team at Amnesty which does remote research. So we have satellite experts, we have open source investigators, we have data analysts, all in the goal of kind of helping Amnesty's research, especially at this time where we have to do all the work at distance, and it's harder for us to get into the field and actually talk to victims of human rights abuses. So we use these open source techniques to push Amnesty's research forward. We've been doing it for a long time, but it's been coming especially to the fore in the last year. I just add also with a team at Amnesty which manages a program called the Digital Verification Corps, which is a network of 7 universities we work with around the world, of which Pearlé is a member of UC Berkeley Human Rights Center, which is, you know, is a great thing that we've managed to bring this together to have that partner with us. But we also work with universities in South Africa, in Canada, in the UK, in Hong Kong, and in Mexico.
Thank you very much for this very complete introduction. So just to introduce ourselves, first of all, I want to thank Jennifer, who is taking care of the coordination and the logistics to make this webinar slick and working. She will be also there, as she said, to collect your questions and read them out loud after each part of this webinar. So do not hesitate to put comments and questions in the chat box. She will be there to collect them for you and share them with everyone. Jennifer is First Draft training coordinator. Sam, you introduced yourself already, so I will pass on directly to me. My name is Nwaezeigwe. I'm Global Head of Partnerships at First Draft. I am French and German, so I'll ask for your forgiveness as my English is far from perfect. Now we are coming, last but not least, let me introduce our speakers of the day, Pearlé, Nwaezeigwe, and Gülin Çavuş. Thank you so much for being here with us today. It's very early for you, Pearlé, I think, and the evening already for you, Gülin. So thank you again, and it's an honor to have such fantastic women with us to share their insights on these vital topics with perspectives coming all the way from California and Nigeria onto Turkey. Gülin, would you please introduce yourself in a couple of words for our audience?
Yes, sure. Thank you for this panel first. And I'm editor-in-chief at Teyit.org, which is independent fact-checking organizations in Turkey. And we do mostly verification since 2016, and mostly verified user-generated content. And personally, I'm conducting training on online investigation. And so I guess it's enough for now.
Okay. Pearlé, could you explain to us who you are and what your background is?
Hi, thank you so much, Marie and Sam, for having me here. And to everyone listening, thank you all for attending. I'm Pearlé Nwaezeigwe, and I'm Nigerian by birth, and I moved to the States to study at UC Berkeley. So I studied law, so I'm an attorney, and I work at the Human Rights Center. And as Sam mentioned, we worked with the Human Rights Investigations Lab, where we had to go through content online on social media that was likely to incite violence in specific countries in the world. And during that time, this is where I learned about resiliency, how to be able to watch these videos and look at these content online without being necessarily affected, as these videos kind of are very triggering because many of these people are people of color, and so they were very close to home. And thanks to the Human Rights Center, I was able to learn these skills, and creating Rated R, as we'll see further down, was, you know, my gift to other people to learn more about these skills, especially in this unprecedented times.
Thank you very much for that. Now, I have to admit, it was Sam who first came to me with the idea of this webinar. He was extremely enthusiastic about the Rated R project that you just talked to us about, Pearlé. Pearlé will give us a presentation of the resources she and her colleagues did put together on this webinar. But before that, I was wondering, Sam, if you could tell us more about what you see. What is it that you see in the Rated R project?
Yeah, I think there's two or three things which I'd like to highlight. Number one is, I think the most important thing for me, and the thing that I found really inspirational around Rated R, was that it came from the students themselves who we've been working with at UC Berkeley. So, you know, I'd gone in and done training on vicarious trauma. The team, the director of the Human Rights Center at UC Berkeley, Alexa Koenig, and the associate director, Andrea Lampros, you know, really care about trauma. And when I started working with UC Berkeley back in 2016, it was like front and center. So to see the students, and sorry, Pearlé, to call you a student, I don't mean that in any way, you know, pejoratively. I mean it very inspirationally. You know, to see students kind of take what we had, you know, the kind of foundations of thinking about resiliency that we had provided them with, and to go on and create something that I think is really inspirational and really speaks to, you know, the generation who's doing this and the different groups that are involved in this at the time it came out, I just think is really amazing. And the second, so that's kind of takes it into the second space. It kind of talks to different audiences that, you know, as director of the Human Rights Center, Alexa, and myself as head of the Evidence Lab at Amnesty, you know, we're of a certain age. So it's like, this is enabling people of other generations and other spaces to actually think about resilience. So I think those things are just really inspirational. And then the third thing is just like the amazing graphics. I think the graphics are just so wonderful that how could one not love Rated R for the graphics that they designed? So
Definitely.
You know, so it was all these things, and it's just taking it forward. It's taking the conversation forward. It's thinking of it in new and different ways that, you know, somebody who grew up and started to think about vicarious trauma, you know, in the age of I guess the Arab Spring. So, you know, 2010 in Egypt, 2011 Syria, already 9 years on, you know, the discussions are different. The discussions have changed. How social media operates has changed. We're in a new environment of social media. So having people push that forward and who understand that and are thinking about it is really valuable and you know, really invaluable for the whole space.
Exactly. That's also really how I approached it. I mean, it's really bite-sized and in a very horizontal approach. It's very accessible, and the fact that the design is that beautiful also makes it probably more easy to access for people who might be in distress already and not want to be like talked to from a top-down perspective. It's much more like peer-to-peer exchange, and I think that's extremely valuable. We also invited Gülin to represent Teyit's work in this conversation. There were several reasons for that. I would say that Teyit, first of all, is doing an amazing job at covering misinformation in Turkey. But also making the information available for the wider public, and taking a look at their Instagram account, for example, says it really on how much they are putting effort into making the work available for the wider audience. Teyit is also doing this job in the Turkish context, where information is often extremely politicized, but we'll probably go back to that later. And also Gülin and Teyit do take the question of vicarious trauma seriously when it comes to their own teams of researchers and journalists and fact checkers. It does really make sense for us to have this practical and professional perspective on the topic. I don't know if you have anything to add on that, Sam.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to give it a little bit of, you know, a background on why, you know, we thought Teyit was a perfect partner. I think for me, you know, I'm just in constant awe of the work that Teyit does in Turkey, and I'll confess I'm a Turkish speaker and have a lot of interest in what goes on in Turkey. But I think, you know, there's an organization such as Teyit working in a space where even being independent can be perceived as being political, yet is carrying on doing that work time and time again, is just also like a really amazing thing. And the fact that the Teyit keeps doing it, I think is an inspiration to us all. And I was just really wanted to learn about how that feels and the pressures that brings to the day-to-day work, you know, where, you know, think about it, being independent can be perceived as political. And, you know, I often think, you know, there's a way of looking at Turkey, which is actually what happens in Turkey often spreads everywhere else, I like to think. So a lot of what we're seeing in the United States now, you know, around the disinformation ecosphere, actually we could see in Turkey a couple of years ago. So I think there's a lot to be learned from what Teyit has gone through as we come up to, you know, November the 3rd, and to think about kind of those kind of pressures that are put on journalists even when they're trying to be independent.
Exactly. So now we're going to dig into the topic. When we are using words such as vicarious trauma and resilience, it seems wise to start by trying to define it, so to make sure that we're all on the same page when we're talking about that. Both Sam in the guides that he has published and Pearlé on the Rated R website are giving their own definitions of these words. I chose these two definitions as they relate to the issue of crime and thus focus on professions that are others than the ones we are talking about today in terms of like relating to information. They come from the glossary created by the Office of Victims of Crime in the United States. I'll let you read them. And I was wondering if Sam or Pearlé, you already had some comments about these definitions. How do they resonate with your own experience and with the definitions that you would put on these terms? Gülin as well, if you have some comments.
Sam?
I'm happy to go first unless you have a...
Oh yeah, sure. You can go first. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think a couple of thoughts on both those terms. I think I think they're both perfectly, you know, obviously very good explanations, very good descriptions. I think for our conversation, I think, you know, we also have to think about the relay mechanism of which we're experiencing this trauma. So we're experiencing it through, you know, we're another step removed almost, and especially in this kind of COVID lockdown time where it's, you know, we're not meeting people as much, right? So there's a filter, there's a lens through which we see it all, which is our screens effectively. So I think, you know, with the first definition, I think it's a great definition, but I think, you know, for our purposes, for our journalistic purposes, we need to think through it through that lens. You know, I think probably everybody here has now adopted the term, and I know somebody came up with it, and I can't remember their name, you know, but the term doom scrolling, and as you know, it's become the word. It's probably going to be the word of the year, probably, you know. So I think, you know, that kind of interaction with our devices of experiencing things is a slight difference here. And resilience, I think, obviously resilience is a very important thing. I just worry about our overuse of the term resilience. And somebody once said to me not so long ago, you know, it's like, why are we always talking about resilience? Because it forces us as individuals to deal with the problem. Rather than getting help from outside, rather than organizations, if you are lucky enough to work for an organization with a support system in place, or without a support system in place, rather than the organization looking after you, resilience puts it on the burden on the individual to look after themselves, which is something that I've started thinking about quite a lot. I mean, I still think resilience is very important, but, you know, I think we need to start reframing it in terms of well-being, which kind of makes it a more holistic approach, or, you know, takes a burden away from the individual, maybe a little bit.
Gülin, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, so just to add to what Sam has said, vicarious trauma can also be seen as compassion fatigue, which is something that we mentioned on the site. So compassion fatigue, because I feel like a lot of people said, some people said in the poll that no, they've not experienced, or they don't think vicarious trauma has been increased. So it could also be that they might not be experiencing vicarious trauma, but they could be experiencing compassion fatigue, where, as Sam has mentioned, we're constantly on our screens because we're at home and we just keep seeing bad news every single day. There hasn't been a day that has gone by that we have just not felt something happen with, for example, Chadwick Boseman dies, Black Panther, that's a whole movement. Ruth Bader Ginsburg passes away. That's another problem, another issue that has a reason. And then, yesterday with Breonna Taylor, the non-indictment that happened. So it's just every single day we're constantly being angry, we're crying, we're feeling something, collective grief in so many ways. And so it becomes exhausting, to say the least. Like, you're constantly trying to be compassionate to somebody else, to your family member, or to yourself. So I think this is another spectrum of vicarious trauma. Like, you might not necessarily be experiencing the pain of another victim, but you yourself are just tired of constantly giving out compassion to other people.
Thank you very much. Gülin?
And I totally agree with the Pearlé. And for me, actually, is the most dangerous part of this type of trauma, and seeing all the time the bad news, is just sometimes causing the giving up. So you just give up to see, or maybe just you cannot be on action. So you cannot do anything else because you constantly see bad news, and it's getting worse and worse. And so you just give up and understand that you cannot do anything about this bad news. So it's really exhausting, as Pearlé says. So it's really important to just showing people you can do something. Also, it's really important.
So now we're getting into our next part, where I will let Sam take the floor, and I'll stop sharing my screen after the next slide.
Thanks, Marie. Yeah, if you just go to the next slide, that'd be great. Super. 2 years ago, I just thought this was really worth mentioning before I kind of go to a couple of questions to Pearlé and to Gülin. 2 years ago, Amnesty released a platform called Toxic Twitter, where we actually analyzed, Amnesty has a program called Decoders, where we kind of are able to kind of harness the power of Amnesty volunteers around the world. I think we had something like 10,000 volunteers work on this platform called Toxic Twitter, where we analyzed, I think, 8 million tweets, and we asked people to kind of go through 8 million tweets and say if they showed hate speech towards women and towards women of color. And back in 2018, when this was released, it was really shocking. We analyzed, I think it was the tweets directed at 680 women, politicians and journalists in the UK and in the USA. And the day that the report was released, the figures were so bad that 13% was wiped off Twitter's stock price on that day that the report was released. And then two years on, we've gone back and said, okay, well, surely Twitter must have improved things by now. And we released this scorecard yesterday, and I think we've got the link to it at the end of the webinar. But what we show really is that Twitter is really not doing enough to tackle this deluge of abuse that women are facing on the Twitter platform, and shows that many women are actually silencing or censoring themselves on the platform. And I think that's important. I think it's an important part of this whole discussion, where, you know, I think that the foundations of Rated R are somewhere in here as well. It's not just looking at videos. It's not just kind of, you know, doing the work, doing the investigative work. It's also just all around us. And I think it's really important that this is understood and considered. You know, and I think, you know, I just saw one comment, not a question, in the chat, which is the worst trauma is realizing how much hate fellow members of the community have towards the other. And I think this shows this perfectly. And so I'd invite everybody to go and have a look at this report. I think it's very well done. But which takes me on really to my first question for our panelists. And I was going to direct this first towards Pearlé. Because when I first became aware of Rated R, it was one of Pearlé's colleagues, Rachel, who talked to me about it. We invited them to write. We invited the team to write a blog post for our Citizen Evidence Lab platform, and I think the opening paragraph of this really strikes me. So bear with me or humor me while I just read it out. And Pearlé and her colleagues say, as recent university graduates, we had exciting plans for the new year, the new decade. We hope to secure jobs, to travel and more in 2020. These plans came to a halt with the COVID-19 pandemic. Like others, we found ourselves in lockdown, alone at home with social media and confronted by the long-standing tragedies of racial injustice and sexual violence worldwide. Unlike some, we had experience managing the stress that can come with viewing large volumes of content, of violent content online. As open source researchers at the Human Rights Center at UC Berkeley, we'd received training on exactly this, and yet we were struggling. How were others coping? ? So I'm gonna kind of stop that there and ask you, Pearlé, how were others coping, do you think? And what's been the impact of you putting this site out there? What's the kind of feedback you've got from people who didn't have this training, who hadn't had the opportunities you've had to talk about it? You know, you talked about, you know, the Black Lives Matter protests in the United States and the injustices around George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, etc. You know, how was the communities that you're connected to, that Rachel's connected to, that everyone else in the team is connected to, how did they find that they were coping?
Right. Thank you for your question and introduction to our paragraph. I would say that it was very hard in general just to go through that, especially I think for our generation, like our generation and the next, which is Generation Z, like we're just so tied to our phones. And the lockdown didn't make it any easier, trying to, like, you know, we're trying to look for a job and it's not happening. And so we just find comfort just like being online. And the next thing you know, we're just like seeing these harmful content, we're seeing protests. And I specifically, I mean, speaking to my experience, I feel like I live in the best of both worlds, being Nigerian and also being here. I have to keep in touch with things that going on at home. So that is just a lot. It's like trying to combine what is going on in the US and what is going on in Nigeria with the gender-based violence happening in Nigeria. There's a lot of strife going on in the country, in Africa at large as well. So it was very hard. And I just kept thinking to myself how I was trained at the Human Rights Center because we're looking at this type of content. However, even though we're a bit detached in the sense that we're working on countries that I wasn't necessarily from, but I was still feeling that, wow, this is happening to people. So when this was happening to me in real time, where I was seeing Black people getting arrested, being killed, or in my own country, women being targeted. And just like you mentioned, the whole online harassment, it is also happening in Nigeria and Twitter, where Nigerian women feel censored to speak out about certain things. They're being labeled as a feminist, and to be labeled as a feminist now has become a derogatory term to women. And so it's just been a lot that is happening. And I was like, okay, well, why don't we create a site? And so I reached out to Rachel, I reached out to Lily, who are both teammates of mine at Human Rights Center. And we just like, okay, how can we make these resources available to people? How can we make it practical? And so when we released the site, people were really excited. I think it was really nice to see how a lot of people didn't know these existed. Like, oh, there's a thing called, like, people know of resilience, but like, what does that look like? And what are those practical ways to achieve them? How can we keep fighting? Because we're still young, we have to keep fighting. Like, these are the cards that we've been dealt, unfortunately, but we just have to be, as advocates, as human rights activists, as people who are interested in creating a world better for the next generation, we have to keep fighting, we have to keep being resilient, and we just have to bounce back. And so it was really nice to see the feedback and how people were really interested to just go on with the resource. I think further down I can speak more to the resources on the site. But yeah, that has been the general response to our site, and we're really grateful for the support.
Fantastic. I mean, I think there's something that just came out of what you said that I'm going to turn to Gülin on. Is because I feel a lot of similarities with Turkey here. Being labelled as a feminist is seen as a derogatory term for women and also for men. How does that play out in Turkey for your work, and how do you feel, in that terms? I mean, I follow Teyit very closely, and I'm fortunate enough to be able to understand some of the, bile that can be directed your way. You know, how is it working in an environment where, as I said before, you know, being perceived, being independent can be seen as being political, and as a woman working in this space?
Actually, is maybe I should give the background of what Turkey just what happened in Turkey just last 5 years, because previous year, before we established Teyit, due to the bombings, explosions in Turkey, 500 people lost their lives. For example, before the bomb attack in Ankara, I just went to the rally. So it's really the streets we live in and pass every day, especially in big cities, had serious security measures, and that were not considered as a normal. So in fact, our traumas were moving from the offline to the online place, or vice versa, because someone shared some messages via WhatsApp, and people just feel insecure in the streets because just of this misinformation. And people, and in such an environment, founder of Teyit, Atakan, and you know what Atakan was trying to do, combat this false information during the attacks from his Twitter account alone. And everybody knows that you cannot do anything alone. So he decided to establish Teyit. And while we are trying to establish Teyit, there was a coup attempt in Turkey. Actually, it's just showed us that what kind of environment Teyit was born into and what kind of struggle we have to face. After we established Teyit, we try to prevent people from consuming false information in 4 elections and 1 referendum. So what we saw during the election process was that the problem of disinformation was also taking root in an increasingly polarized society. And this political polarization is sharpened with the mainstream media. And we witnessed that online media and social media just deepen this polarization, and without taking any responsibility. So any issue can become politicized in Turkey. I guess some can imagine in football, sports, art, and I don't know, anything can be politicized, and it's really create really polarized society. And now we really have to face this kind of things. And while all this happening, also the Turkish army was conducting cross-border operations in Syria, and we frequently saw many graphic images, videos from these occasions. So since 2016, Turkish army had 5 cross-border operations. So during these kind of operations, actually, we have to do fact-checking on this topic, but also during the operations, official news source did their own fact-checking. And they said that there were terrorist accounts sharing non-viral misassociated photos or images from the operation. So another agency and head of the communication department actually published a booklet about this false images. So we have to be in this atmosphere. We try to show false information from both sides, because we have to keeping the balance. And keeping the balance was also kind of a way for protecting ourselves, such an environment, because it's really delicate political atmosphere, and you can be a target easily from the all parties, actually, from the both sides, or I don't know how many sides such an operations or such a war. So also diplomatic decisions and priorities of the Turkish government actually changing the agenda of misinformation on social media. And if there was any political discussion about Uyghur Turks, for example, there were many misinformation about what Chinese government did Uyghurs. So there are many topics like this, like Rohingya Muslims and the discussions between the Myanmar government and Turkish government. And all of these is just shows us we have to tackle with all these conflicts, operations, Syrian refugees problems, and we have to be ready about this. And as a fact-checking organizations, you have to be transparent, you have to be openly share your source, and you can be targeted easily from every side. So sometimes they target you, sometimes they keep their silence because sometimes they need you for verify their information. So everyone lynch on social media, especially on Twitter, every day in a very different topics. Of course, this happens to us a lot as a Teyit and as a journalist and as a woman journalist for me. So I actually started to share less, and especially on Twitter, because I don't want to be a target. I don't want to be drawn into the field of political discussions, and I don't waste my time rather than doing great things for someone who's seeking accurate information online. Because of this gender roles, we know that women are less likely to follow the media and become less visible on social media, and like me actually. And as you say, Sam, these people use less Twitter, especially women. And according to the field study we conduct in 2019, women are more worried about sharing news on social media than men in Turkey. So it's all these things, and in general, especially after the local elections, we started to see the more systematic attacks were made against us after the power change in big cities like Istanbul and Ankara. So it's possible to say that this propaganda struggle is changing the misinformation area. But I guess we just try to keep doing our job and try to find new way to struggle with this, I guess.
Thank you very much. Maybe I have a question for you both, because that's also something that we've discussed before with Sam, is as a professional, as a journalist, as a researcher, as an online investigator, how is it possible to keep the balance between the fact that you are a professional and you might associate the fact of doing online research with the fact of being kind of tough and being able to take in a lot of violence because that's part of kind of your skills and resistance? How much of that, how do you keep the balance with the actual trauma that can come out of it?
Well, I would say that, like, honestly, the word balance is just very tricky, because, like, what really is balance? Like, how do you establish that you have a balanced life? Is that a matrix? I don't know. But I would say, like, with everything going on in the world, I think I personally am coming from I was once an online investigator, and now I'm like an average social media user, basically. So the question is, like, how do I do my own independent research, and how do I fact check that I know this is from an incredible source, this kind of things? How am I sure that I'm not sharing something that is going to be traumatic to the next person? So I think those are the kind of questions that I ask myself whenever I'm online, and just, like, you know, just making sure that the things that I'm sharing are just to educate other people. So then that's the whole purpose of Rated R, like, you know, ensuring that we are giving out tips to people, like, okay, when you're online, this is what to do. This is, you know, don't check this at night. This should be in the bedroom. So all these things are just very practical. And so creating that balance for me, like being professional and my personal life, I think the lines are really blurred at this moment. I mean, the fact that we're working from home is just showing how the lines are becoming more blurry. So there really isn't any balance. I'll just say like the tips that we created just helps us minimize any risk or any burnout, because it's possible to just like be burnt out from doing both and just trying to ensure that, oh, you're being professional, but at the same time, you're also taking time for yourself and just kind of things. So yeah, I think that's just like the summary of what rated R is. And I think for me, it was just to keep me accountable. Like, okay, I'm going to create rated R, but I'm not going to say all these things and not do them. So I think maybe that is my own balance and just like my own checks and balance. Like, so I've created this professional side and this is my own way of like, living out my own personal life. So yeah.
Thank you very much. Gülin, do you have something to add on that? I'm just conscious of time and that we still have a lot to cover.
No, actually, yeah, campus.
Okay, we also have I think we also have a question in the chat box, Jennifer, if you can read it for us.
So we have a question in the Q&A box. It is directed to all of you guys, but it is anybody on the panel a mental health professional or have any mental health training?
That's for sure.
No, I mean, I'm not me neither. I mean, I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a psychological training, but I think what we're trying to do, what I've been trying to do through all the work I've done is show that this is something that everybody can take into their own hands and to build awareness around it. I think with vicarious trauma in particular, I think it's important that organizations and individuals understand it. So actually, we can keep ourselves, if we think of mental health being a spectrum rather than, I think we tend to think of mental health being a little bit like a broken leg, right? You're either okay or you're not, and I think that's completely wrong. We're on a spectrum, and some days are great, some days are bad. And I really, what Pearlé says about balance and every day kind of blurring into one another at the moment really resonates with me massively. And I really do feel myself like going on some days like really down here, and I'm like, I've got to do something about this. And I think what we're trying to do, or what I've been trying to do with all my work, and for which I have worked with mental health professionals, is to show that it's something with awareness we can take care of ourselves, because we're doing hard work, and that's really important. And that managers within organizations, where possible, have to also consider it. So I think that's really important.
Definitely. Pearlé,
just to summarize. So no, I'm not a mental health professional, although I've had some trainings with the Human Rights Center on Resiliency. However, rated R lists professionals like therapists and like mental health organizations. So that was the whole idea. I think we actually put disclaimers like, we're not mental health professionals. We can't help you with any like legally everything. So we do have professionals that were listed on the site. And so the whole idea was just to make it accessible, because like I said, mental health isn't something that is spoken of, and it's not something that is accessible to people, especially low income areas. So that is the reason why we created the site, to just make it practical. And like Sam said, we want people to also take up that responsibility to be more resilient. So it's like a two-part thing, like you start, and then we also have people who can also help you continue that journey.
And I can also maybe share some different perspective, because it's you can find different way to protect your team. And for example, different coaching, for example, for non-violent communication or giving feedback or resilience and similar topics can help also people. So we don't have such a background, but we can make powerful our teams and ourselves. It's really important, and we find different ways to struggle such a things and facing such a trauma in our team, and it's really important. And if I have a time, and then maybe I can share some our experiences about this.
Definitely, we'll get to that afterwards. We're going to the next part. I just wanted to comment on what Vidya shared into the chat box about the fact of having different social media accounts for the work that you're doing on disinformation and misinformation that are different from your own media accounts. I think that's something that we are really valuing at First Draft as well, especially when you're going into some fringe networks or some messaging apps or other spaces like that. I think it's extremely important to protect yourself. Let's continue with our building resilience part. I'm just going to start to share my screen again. Just a minute, bear with me. And here we are. I wanted now to invite Pearlé to walk us through the resources she created with her colleagues, and which are really excellent.
Thank you so much. So I'm just going to run through it. I think Sam gave like an amazing introduction to Rated R. He mentioned that it's practical, powerful, and punchy. That was like really exciting. And to think that my name is Pearl, so it's like all the P's all at once. Thank you so much for that. You mentioning about the designs. Funny enough, I actually, I designed the whole site. Most of the graphic designs were done by me. It was really nice. I had Lily and Rachel just keep going through it and making sure that it was accurate, the colors, everything. I'm very aware of how short the attention span is of users, especially my generation and the next. And so I just wanted it to be very catchy. And so, yeah, this is what we created. And like we mentioned, Rated R is just to ensure that we're having these resources, we're creating practical tips to ensure that people are bouncing back. And so Rated R is just a combination of three things. So resistance, revolution, which is what we're experiencing right now in different countries. People are experiencing actual revolutions and people are resisting right now. But most importantly, we need to be resilient on how to keep bouncing back and to keep fighting. And so the tagline, revolution is televised, was just, the fact that we're constantly on our screen, we're seeing it happen every single day. Was just a reminder of the fact that we're living in a revolution and like we have the power to make or break democracies thanks to social media. I mean, the good and the bad. And so how to navigate those spaces is what Rated R is about. Next slide, please. So yeah, just a quick introduction to the team. I'm Pearl Nwaezeigwe, although short for Way. And so these are my teammates, Lily and Rachel. As you can see, we have very cheesy avatars beneath us, just to show how we're very into activism, both online and for people who are on the streets, people who are behind their screens doing the petitions, reaching out to government authorities. This is to just show how we're connected all together. And so Lily and Rachel, they're all graduates from UC Berkeley and interested in cybersecurity, digital rights. And so we came together and we decided, okay, you know what, let's give back to society. This is our own way to be a healer to the community. And we created Rated R. Next slide, please. And so right now, I'm just going to go through the tips that we actually created to help people be more resilient online. I would say, like, for the audience listening, I think Rated R is, targeted to everyone, but there is like the area of like average social media users. So people who are just like online and just use social media, this really is for them. And so the first thing I wanted to do is like be intentional. So when you're watching or when you go on social media, you should know the certain content that might be traumatic based to your experience. So as a Black woman, there are certain things that would trigger my experiences having lived in the US. And so I'm very careful not to watch these type of videos or to look out for certain content like that. Set aside time on social media. So I keep telling people, stop mindlessly scrolling. Don't just wake up in the morning and just want to go on Twitter, go on Instagram, go on like your various social media platforms. Take out time and also put screening time on it. So after 1 hour of going through social media, just have an app that just turns it off. So while watching graphic videos, turn off or reduce the sound on videos. While we're in the Human Rights Center, we never watch videos on loud. So if we're going to watch a violent content, the sound was usually off, just because it can also be very traumatic. The gunshots or somebody screaming in the background can replay in your head over and over again. Reduce the size of graphic videos. So if you're working on a computer, we usually advise people to reduce the image size. Like, you don't want to watch something on full screen. This isn't Netflix and chill. You gotta try to make it very little and just, you know, try and look out for the things that you actually want to see. Okay, if you're actually investigating a video, okay, what are the specific things you're looking out for? Is it the location? Is it the people? What time? So you want to be very intentional and not having to watch the full video. Post disclaimers. So if you're going to share it to somebody else, let them know what they're likely to see. Let them know that this is very graphic or this is likely to trigger certain emotions. So these are the first tips. Next slide, please. So where and when to look at news. So do not look at news in your bedroom, please. Like, just because we're at home 24/7 due to the lockdown, I advise people, don't look at bad news in your bedroom, because that's where you're going to sleep and sometimes work. Try and take it to the kitchen, try to take it to the living room. We are going on a walk. Do not look at tragic news late at night. I feel like I'm guilty of this one because I did this yesterday. I was just like constantly reading news of Breonna Taylor. And I was like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. But please don't look at the news at night. Because of the time zone, I'm always just trying to keep up with everything, but I try my best not to do it at night. Take breaks. So every once in a while, just, you know, tell yourself, I'm not going to look at social media. Eat, exercise, talk to a friend. It's not every time you have to be making comments. Why don't you just go on a call with someone via Zoom? Change your settings. I realized that a lot of my friends still have the notifications on. So every day you're harassed by CNN, Twitter, Instagram, something is constantly notifying you that something is happening. And that can be very annoying and trigger anxiety in itself. And so we usually advise people, please turn off, please turn off your settings, deactivate auto download. Be careful when scrolling through Instagram stories, and you can also create lists on Twitter. So Twitter, unfortunately, plays video without you clicking on it. So you have to turn it off on the settings so that it doesn't automatically play. And if you want to avoid the timeline altogether, you can actually create lists on Twitter. So you can just only look at certain people and credible sources. So the last slide, just to summarize everything. Good. So self-care prompts. So these are, if you go on the sites, over time, you would see that we ask just very cheesy questions for people to just get off from their seats or leave their phones and do something interesting and fun. So just for the interest of time, I'm going to stop here. The other slides just kind of mentioned the past events that we've had, talking about self-care Sunday, the toolkits that are on the sites, the things that you find on the site, resources, basically where to find therapists, online therapists, meditation apps, and so much more, academic resources. So you can find us at ratedresilient.com. Our IG page is down there too. And we just want to say thank you from myself, Lily, and Rachel.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. This is very useful, I hope, for everybody looking at it. Maybe I'm going to stop sharing my slide again. I wanted to ask you, Gülin, well, first of all, if you have any comments on what you just saw, and also how within Teyit you're tackling this issue of vicarious trauma and resilience within the team, at the scale of the team, for newcomers, but also for people who are there on the long term.
Yeah. Thank you, and thank you for Pearlé, and it all is great advice. Thank you. And in the Teyit, we have a do no harm principles for our team and also for our followers. And we learn all our methods in the way, because we start with 4 people, and now with the freelancers and with the full-timers, we have 30 people. And now we have more than 1 million followers on all social media platforms, and we have to be more responsible to everyone, but especially for our teams and the newcomers in our team. And Teyit is a social enterprise and impact-oriented organization, so we start to create working place which have high ethical and quality standards for media ecosystem. And when we think about the Turkish media ecosystem, we have a really high standards for all media workers. So first, to take support team members for psychological help, and unfortunately, such an effort is really rare when we think about the organizations in Turkish media. And in our daily works, we try to the methods to just stop this traumatic process. So before COVID-19, we have some precautions for traumatic and graphic images and videos in our workflow. We use Slack for daily and for our workflow, and we sharing suspicious contents, for example, the operations or something happened in Turkey. And with this, while we are using this and sharing some contents, first we write the warnings for our team members, and we said that this is graphic content or graphic images and be careful. And after that, we put the content in the thread, under the thread. So if we were struggling with traumatic events like, for example, earthquakes, specific earthquakes or specific cross-border operations, we create new private channels to protect other team members from the graphic image and videos content. It's really important to be in the conversation with knowing what you see. So because everyone in the team, even this person not interested doing fact checking, for example, doing some financial things, can send suspicious contents to the editorial team and can see the doubtful contents, and we can interfere the different echo chambers with this way, but we have to protect all the team members with this way. If we know someone has a traumatic experiences on the specific topic, we don't include this person in the specific workflow of fact checking, like earthquake or femicide or something like this. So we have to be careful about this, and we have to know each other better while working together. For protecting our team members from hate speech and lynch against us, we don't share these messages on our public Slack channels. Our engagement editors only share specific messages with team leaders. And we know that it needed to, if we have to take actions, our team leaders do something about this. Not all team members face negative comments about us or for our works. If, I don't know, if newcomers, especially fact checkers, being upset about what people said and the comments, I especially talk with them and share with them the story of the Teyit, and we become more powerful day by day, and we come bigger and bigger, and it's important doing this. And we also do, how can I say, effectively Slack with, for example, random channels or fun stuff channels to feel like we are human beings. And we have a music channel, and it's really important because our team use this channel very effectively. And because music can be mood shifter and give a sense of feeling I'm not alone. So I'm with a group of people with different tastes and with different struggles. And we have actually Spotify lists and collecting all songs which shared in this channel. And it's really great things to hear with the songs together. And after the COVID-19, we adapted our system to the online. Every day we came together for check-in and check-out Zooms, Monday and the evenings, and to see each other and saying hello and asking what they cook and how they feel. And we play games online, and remember, we are not a robots. We have to work all day long, and we are human beings. And especially in the crisis times, we try to protect each other to working too much, because at the home, we confuse when start the working and when we finish working. So it's really important to caring each other and just remember to stop working. And we also use apps like Headspace. It's a kind of mindfulness apps during the COVID-19 especially, and the quarantine times, and handle with the stress. And sometimes in the Zoom meetings, we we did morning dances in the morning and start a day with the different energetic modes. So before the COVID-19 and during the pandemics, we get team coaching for nonviolent communication and giving feedback and this kind of similar topics. It's really important because while you are struggling so much things and facing such a traumatic times every day, it's really exhausting, and this creates stress, and this stress create tensions between the team members, and it's really affects your works. And this kind of coaching programs as actually help us to understand each other better and communicate better. And on Mondays, we do our weekly meetings with the whole team. But before the meetings, we are talking about our feelings, and we have a feeling sheets because we need this. Sometimes we just think that we only have a feeling being sad, being happy, being tired or angry, but actually human beings have endless feelings like being vulnerable, joyful, eager, impatient, thrilled, and I don't know, whatever you said, but it's really important to talk about feelings and having a time to think about what we are feeling now. So second things, in our Monday mornings, we appreciate each other's to what they did last week. If I really like what one of my teammates did last week, I thank and appreciate. And it's really important to motivate each other because it's also refresh our understanding to the jobs. Even we doing our jobs for creating impact and fighting for the truth and fighting against misinformation, at the end it's a job. And every day and everybody needs to reason and remember the reason for doing this. And we also use shortcuts of the Slack channels to appreciate our works online. And in the team, we have everyone have buddies. And so these two people should talk each other and asking each other questions and caring each other. So if we cannot understand one of our friends have a bad situations in the Zoom meetings, this method helps us to being connect and no one just escape the whole chaos. This is our methods.
That's extremely powerful. I mean, there are lots of things of different things to take away there for managers and for employees who are listening to us. We have two interesting questions here. If that's okay for you, we might take like 5-10 more minutes to wrap it up. We also had some resources to share, but let's take the two questions first. Jennifer, if we can, maybe can you read the two questions so that we can answer both directly?
Sure thing, Marie. So the first question is, how do we tackle repetitive misinformation in social media? Second question, a bit provocative. Do you think that by avoiding to watch or hearing about the trauma/violence suffered by others can also lead us to become more insensitive? Because the videos of violence/trauma or disturbing pictures also are sometimes moving and help us empathize with the victims and lead us to speak for them. Like the videos of the brutalities on people led to protests, movements, and outrage.
Who else want to reply to that? Pearlé.
Right. So to the last comment, that is actually a good question. So it's something that we raised on the team. Like, we created Rated R not because we wanted people to avoid these videos. We wanted people to manage it. And that is it. Like, we want you to see these videos, and that's why Rated R is a combination of three things. Like, there's the resistance and there's the revolution. So we're aware of what is happening right now, and we want people to still be aware, but we want them to be aware in a safe manner. So that is the purpose of Rated R, and that is the purpose of having these tools. We want you to still know what is going on and to be able to empathize and to be able to fight back. But at the same time, we also care of your mental health, because you can't give from an empty cup. Like, you can't give empathy when you're not even empathizing with yourself or taking care of yourself. So please know that you still have to be aware, but there are very safe ways of doing that.
Thank you very much. Other replies on that one, or on how to avoid the repetitive misinformation coming up?
Maybe I can answer this question. If this question means that the seeing on the feed, this repetitive misinformation, I think it depends on the people's echo chambers. So people can maybe exclude some kind of accounts and maybe just create different echo chambers and different people can be followed. But if this person or the other people have to follow this kind of accounts, I just suggest that doing some lists or doing some different Facebook accounts using this kind of accounts, because it's actually just maybe dividing the personal account and the working account. If you don't want to see this kind of misinformation on personal account, you can just create a new one. And if you just want to not want to saying this, I think sharing firstly with the fact checkers of your country, and then you can maybe delete this account from your follower lists, maybe. I don't know.
That's a very good suggestion. Okay, I'll just get back to the resources. Just to let you know that we will share the resources with you. We will share the links in a follow-up email. So don't worry if we go very, very fast on it, because we're already really out of time. So let me just share my screen. Here is the website of First Draft. Here you can find the guide that Sam has co-written with Michel Grant in 2017 about for journalism and journalists and students about vicarious trauma. But you can also find some articles that my colleague Lydia Morish did write about how to protect yourself during when you're writing about coronavirus, but also how to protect your team as a newsroom or as a manager. And I think that can be extremely helpful. You can also find the first webinar that we did with Sam and Victoria and Lydia around vicarious trauma. Sam, I'll give you 1 minute to go through the resources here.
I can do it quicker than a minute, I'm sure. Yeah, so just a few resources from the Amnesty side. This is a link to the Citizen Evidence Lab website, citizensevidence.org, where we just put lots of case studies also from partners. You'll find the Rated R blog post that I mentioned and spoke from there as well, and also some other vicarious trauma experiences. The Twitter scorecard is the research we put out yesterday. Horrible link, I notice, but I'm sure if you go to Twitter and kind of try and hunt it down from Amnesty, you'll find it there. And then the last part is a book that was published earlier this year called Digital Witness, which is about doing open source investigations for human rights work. But in there, there's a chapter I co-wrote with Meg Satterthwaite of NYU, Sarah Nucky of Columbia University, and Adam Brown, who's a psychologist also based at NYU, New York University, which really goes into some of the science behind vicarious trauma and lots of experiences around mitigating it.
Thank you. Pearlé, you have like 1 minute, 30 seconds to tell us if there are more things that you want that we can find on the Rated R website, or other resources that you would recommend.
Yeah, so Rated R basically is a host of resources. So it's like everything that you need on informational videos. So if you do have more questions on what vicarious trauma is, there are videos that explain what are the various types of resiliency. The site also has that. And we also do have events, so events around the world. So we have this really cool calendar where if you're interested in attending these type of seminars, webinars, or actual self-care events or mindfulness events, there are calendars. And for us, we actually do host every month for Black women on resiliency and self-care. And we do have a lot of toolkits for therapists, meditation apps, journals, just really practical stuff. We do have toolkits and links to these various sites and local bookstores where you can buy these, and online therapists for professionals. So if you want to speak to someone, the site has everything. So it's like a one-stop shop for everything rated resilient in this unprecedented times. Thank you.
Thank you. Gülin, you mentioned that page, mentioning that most of the resources you had were not like publicly available, but that this page was made public about how to communicate during the pandemic. If you want to tell us more about that, like in 1 minute, 30 seconds?
Yeah, actually, I realized that with this webinar, we haven't shared our experiences with public. So after that webinar, I think I started creating some resources. So it's just a link, just sharing people, how can we communicate on Zoom meetings. It's really basic, the communication way, but not the resource. But I'll start to do resource. I hope.
Very good. We also thought with Sam that we definitely needed to talk about the Dart Center when making a webinar about vicarious trauma. So maybe Sam, if you want to give us like 30 seconds about.
Sure. I mean, the Dart Center, for those who don't know, is based out of Columbia University Journalism School, but also has presence in Europe and in Asia. You know, anything around journalism and trauma is covered by the Dart Center, be that interviewing victims of violence, victims who've experienced trauma themselves, through to, you know, journalists in the streets during protests and experiencing trauma, to vicarious trauma. So, you know, it's just an amazing tool, an amazing set of resources available on anything trauma related and journalism related.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for your time. Thank you for being there. Thank you, Pearlé, for being there so early. Gülin for being there so late with us. Thank you, Sam, for the co-hosting of this webinar. Thanks to Amnesty as well. Thank you all for listening to us. I hope this was really useful and practical for you. I wish you a happy day or a happy evening or a happy night or wherever you are.